Welcome to Cathedral Talk, a podcast about architecture and Minecraft, where we converse to save Notre-Dame.
To Cathedral Talk Reacts. We have a new episode dropping about the last episode of Cathedral Talk. I'm here with my boys.
Boys,
Tom and David.
They're back off furlough, everyone.
David's face is, I'm not sure I want to participate in this bit.
How did it feel to not get paid last time around? How did it feel to be slapped down by the man?
I had to find alternative sources for zero income.
Who's the man?
I think I am.
Tom. Tom's the man.
I don't know if I can accept this premise.
It's improv. David, you have to do yes and.
Oh, Tom and I could never do improv with Tom if that's the rule.
Oh, okay.
So how was your holidays?
That was good.
Good.
Very cold.
Did you travel or were you in Colorado the whole time?
Colorado's a big enough state that I stayed in state and traveled.
Yeah, it's a pretty big state and you're pretty much the center of it, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Did you get much snow?
Yeah, we got snow even today, but we've had snow on the ground for a lot longer than a typical duration of Colorado snow.
As in it usually is melted by now?
Yeah, it usually melts really fast.
Oh, really?
Well, at least on the prairie. I can't say the same thing about the mountains.
Sure. We were both at our parents' for the holidays itself, and we actually did get a white Christmas for that, which it's been a while since I had actual white Christmas.
It was a preemptive white Christmas. The snow was already there by the time we arrived.
By the time you arrived.
Well, was it snow in the middle of your... I guess that's true.
Yeah,
we waited a day.
We walked around with Theo in the snow, and he was very quiet and enjoyed the whole thing until at some point he made one noise. We were surprised, didn't realize what it was, and it was because his hat had slipped over his eyes so he couldn't see anything.
That happens with baby hats.
All 7 of you crashed at your parents' place?
Tom stayed in a hotel.
I stayed in a hotel, a luxurious king suite in the hotel with an attached queen suite side by side. I was going to stay in a cheap hotel, but then turned out that hotel was... also run by this more expensive hotel. And they said, we don't have enough staff for both hotels, so we're going to close the cheap hotel and bump you over to the expensive hotel at no additional cost. And then they put us in the most luxurious quarters. So I'm most pleased with the outcome.
I slummed it at my parents'.
Yep. In your closet of a bedroom.
No, we slept in their bedroom. I had a baby to sleep in there. There's no way we could have slept in my closet of a bedroom with a baby.
I slept in your closet of a bedroom with my baby last summer.
That's because you share a bed.
No. He was in a pack and play in the corner side by side the bed.
Why did you do that?
Just because we have 2 boys and we have to keep them separated.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Anyway.
Cathedral Talk Reacts.
What'd you think of that episode about Washington National Cathedral?
What did I think?
Tom, what did you think?
I'm glad the edit's over. That's what I think. That was a long edit. I didn't say anything at the time, although I think it was obvious that we did not record in the usual acoustic space. We recorded in the central bell tower of Washington National Cathedral, which is a big ambient space with lots of very solid walls all around you. So it was very echoey. And I was like, this is not ideal for podcasting, but it's also epic. So we're just going to go for it. And it made the edit job tricky.
Did it double as his office?
No, but we both agreed that it was our favorite space in the cathedral. So we just decided to go up there and enjoy the view.
Fair enough.
It is one of the best views in Washington.
Hands down.
Yeah, it's the highest point in all of Washington, higher than anything else on top of Mount St. Alban. You can see out all over to the mall with the Capitol building and the Washington Monument and the Lincoln and Jefferson Memorials, Kennedy Center. They're a bit far down there. They're tiny, but it's a beautiful vista.
They're not that tiny.
Was it a clear day?
It was a clear day, yes.
But he's also been there 400 times before, so he didn't particularly need to see the view that particular day.
This is, as people who have been faithfully listening to the podcast know, I am a bell ringer at the cathedral, and so I am up there with some regular frequency. More before the babies, but hopefully one day the babies will let me go more.
You're not going to bring the babies to bell ringing?
Oh, he has.
I have once or twice, but it's not practical.
Just baby Bjorn them and just ring while they're strapped to your chest?
Well, I wanted to mention, too, I said that it's the highest point in D.C., but I don't mean to state that the cathedral is the tallest building in D.C. That's not true. It's certainly tall. I think it's like the 5th tallest building in D.C. I have to double check that. But because it's on the mountain overlooking all of D.C., and when I say mountain, I mean tall hill, it's at the highest point. The central tower is at the highest point in all of D.C. So it is above the Washington Monument. If you look straight out, you can sort of see at eye level that you're a little bit above that Washington Monument.
What else could be, if 5th tallest, what else could be taller? The Washington Monument.
Honestly, the tower at the National, the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception
at Catholic University.
Its tower is actually just a tiny bit taller than Washington National Cathedral's.
Yeah.
However, it's a much thinner and not as huge tower as national cathedrals. You know how it is with these spindly things. You could just beat somebody by a few feet. And the old post office pavilion, I actually think might be slightly taller.
Oh,
too,
really?
I think.
Huh.
I think it is. Yeah, I have to double check that, but I think it is.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like 5th or 6th. I'm sure I've seen there's some Wikipedia page like tallest buildings in DC.
The forever reliable source.
Mm-hmm.
Zach, to your question earlier, that room may not double as Joe Alonso's office, but it does double as the room where Tom got engaged.
Yeah, that's true. I had to remember that that's true. Yeah.
Maybe cut that part out.
Well, you did have kind of like the least definitive engagement of all time.
This is true.
Did you just turn to your to-be fiance and be like, hey, want to get married? And she was like, what? I can't hear you over the bells. And you're like,
no, it was not during a normal ringing session. We just wanted to go enjoy the view, and it was a nice summer day, if I remember correctly.
Well, bells don't actually play a part in the React episode.
Yeah, this isn't a bell episode. Bell episodes are every multiple of 10.
Right.
That's right. We're not allowed to talk about bells except by Tom's weird formulaic rules.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Was this pre or post earthquake, your proposal?
Oh, that was post. The earthquake was early into my time here in DC. I had moved to DC in 2009. The earthquake was just 2 years later in 2011.
So you had the romantic views of scaffolding?
Yes. I mean, the building has ever since been having large parts of it with scaffolding on it. And the central tower has a lot of scaffolding on the top of it, but it doesn't obstruct the view.
Zach, is that when you had just moved away from DC? Was that right? Did you move away right before the earthquake?
I moved away the Thanksgiving before... Yeah, I'm trying to remember. So
Thanksgiving it must have been 2010 because
2010,
you were at Earlham, or you were in the area my freshman year. You missed an earthquake. We're sorry.
Well, I had previous to living in DC with Tom, I lived in Southern California where I had experienced several earthquakes.
I didn't know you lived in Southern California.
Yeah. I've been all over the country.
How long were you there?
I was there for the year after my graduation, so 07 and 08.
You didn't experience earthquakes on the level of what DC got, did you?
I don't remember what the magnitude of the earthquakes I experienced, but they were definitely, it felt like a large semi driving at highway speeds right outside of my building.
Huh, okay. I don't have a sense of how common sensations like that are in that part of the world that has lots of fault lines. Obviously, people talk about like needing to be resilient for the big one, but I don't know how often they get minor but still noticeable earthquakes.
The earthquake resiliency that was drilled into Washington National Cathedral and those metal posts being put in, does that ruin the Gothic-y experience for you with the building, or is that just a fact of reality that you've come to grips with?
I'm not too obsessed with that. The things that are going to be, held together in place with some more metalwork are, like we said, largely decorative. All these pinnacles and finials they do have a function. They add weight to the tops of the buttresses to keep them a little bit more stable, but they're not like an iron chain that's holding the whole thing up from toppling over like at Amiens. So it's a different level of necessity, I think. It's some insurance is what I would say.
So is that how you categorize it in terms of changes you are comfortable with? The parts that need to remain Gothic are related to the actual integrity of the structure, whereas decorative, who cares?
Yeah.
Or at least decorative does not take away from if it's Gothic or not.
Yeah. I mean, you might remember I also asked the question, like, were they trying to include some different, like, geometries with how the stones, like, fit together and interlock and stuff? And it sounds like they weren't going to do too much more of that than what was already done, instead using the metal to sort of be as insurance holding the things together from the inside out. And it's a very common practice, it sounds like, today. Like, actually, did you know that the Parthenon in Athens has been under this extensive restoration for like decades? They've been trying to reassemble the Parthenon in Athens, Greece, with like putting back a lot of the stones that have been for centuries just spewed about the Acropolis. And one of the ways they're doing that is they're using, in some cases, special metal braces down the center of the columns to get them to fit back together, which is a similar thing, actually.
Decades for the Parthenon is like a speck in its history.
That's true. But as far as restorations go, I don't remember exactly, but I want to say like 70s, 80s, somewhere in there. Like, this restoration just keeps going and going and going. And I don't know how close they are to the end. I haven't seen the news on the Parthenon in a while. We'll talk about the whole Parthenon sometime. That'll be fun. So, in terms of some of the details of what you remember from the interview, what are you holding up?
I actually took notes.
Oh, good. Well, I don't need to start.
I listened to this like 2 weeks ago.
Okay. Well,
I don't remember the episode, but I took notes. So hopefully my notes are intelligent.
Okay, great. Well, you know what? What are some notes you took, David? Let's hear it.
Well, one of them was what Zack said. I wrote, glad to hear it's more earthquake resilient. Interesting to hear about the rods through the pinnacles rather than stone on stone. Actually, I guess that was somewhat of a revelation to me, in that I didn't realize that they were just stone on stone, and that was as effective of a strategy to just have something remain steady was to just do stone on stone.
Yep.
But we talked about that.
Well, the stone on stone, and again, not just stone on stone, but just like two flat surfaces of relatively tall, like oblong monoliths of stone, right? Like, pinnacles aren't like a flat block, right? A pinnacle is, a tall, pointy thing.
Sure.
And like, if it was just a model, you could just go dink and it would fall off, right? But I guess just it's that heavy that for decades that it would stay there even in heavy windstorms.
I mean, wind doesn't usually move stone, so that tracks.
Yeah, not until the earthquake.
Yeah, that's a different order. I mean, that has the word earth in it, as in stone, and quake as in move.
Yeah.
I probably have questions for you that you are not necessarily going to be prepared to answer.
Sounds like fun.
How much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood?
In Notre-Dame.
Well, not anymore.
Joe Alonso is a stonemason. What is the difference between a stonemason to an architect to an engineer, or like a mason and a stone carver? Like, these are all very related jobs. I don't quite understand how Mr. Alonso's job is unique from all those other types.
Well, we'll definitely have to get back together with Joe sometime and field him some more questions, because he's got answers for everything. But I will do my best, because I think I have a general sense. The architect is, I think, probably what most people are familiar with, the actual blueprints person, the person who designs the things conceptually from the onset. And of course, once the building's built, if modifications or revisions or restorations need to be done, it's probably the architect's job first to review all the original plans and, how things should be built or rebuilt. And then the engineer's job is somebody who is going to sort of figure out, how's the thing going to hold itself together? Like, is the thing going to really stand up, or is the thing going to fall over under these physical stresses? I generally think of the engineer as the closest thing to the physicist in this group of people. The engineer is the person who's like really figuring out, the physical mechanics of a lot of these things. Not an architect, and I'm not an engineer, so I'm just talking out of, what my layman's readings have told me. But I do remember hearing somebody who went to architect school in my past who was relaying to me that when they were in architect school, they were surprised at how often in classes they were encouraged to just build whatever and don't worry about whether or not it continues to stand up. Don't worry if it's going to fall over. Just design something cool. Again, I cannot confirm this at all, but this is just...
And then just let the engineer take it from there.
And then you can deal with constraints afterwards, right? So, I mean, I imagine that is probably an extreme and an unwarranted example, but I think it does help illustrate the difference in jobs, where the architect has an idea and the engineer says, okay, practically we can. And then the stonemason largely is responsible for the actual assembly. The person who's really putting the thing together, the actual hands-on, mortaring and stone cutting and, assembly. But of course, there's a lot of collaboration going on here. This is a great question that I would like to get more details.
So the stonemason, if we were talking the same for like a skyscraper, the stonemason for a cathedral would be the equivalent to the construction worker, foreman of the construction.
Yeah, I mean,
for a skyscraper.
I mean, have you ever watched This Old House?
Sure.
Like on This Old House, right? They've got your carpenters, right? You've got your general contractors, but you also have your masons, and it's usually the masons who are building, the fireplaces, and if there's stonework like in the steps and stuff for the house, right? Anything that deals with materials and masonry, that's the mason.
Just happens to be that a Gothic cathedral is nothing but, basically.
I mean, to refine your question a little bit, the way I would want to poke the question a little bit more is, do stonemasons, are their set of skills very different from a standard mason who does a lot of brickwork, on, brick structures in town? I'm kind of under the impression, again, just from the talking, that probably a lot of the stonemasons at the cathedral would be perfectly proficient at laying some brick. I don't know if that goes the other way around, though. Like maybe somebody who lays brick isn't as proficient at assembling giant blocks of limestone. But again, these are questions to ask.
From the interview, it sounded like he ordered the limestone to specific specifications from quarries.
Yeah.
So he's not the one cutting it.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
And at some point, he also makes a differentiation between his job and the stone sculptors. He definitely makes it clear that he is not the sculptor.
Like, so there's kind of two veins here. Get it? Veins of stone. There's two kind of real, I sort of like pathways with this limestone, right? You've got the general construction blocks of stone for the piers and the buttresses and the walls and the arches and the vaults. But then you've got your decorative stonework, the gargoyles, the statues, all the tracery in the windows, all the stuff that isn't really structural, but just very decorative. And I'm not entirely clear if a sculptor refers only to that delicate artwork, or if sculptors are also, or carvers, I should say, are carvers also run-of-the-mill carving the basic blocks of stone for construction as well. I'm not sure. I think this might be mentioned. I want to say that they were distinct in, for example, David McCulley's book, which you might remember quickly popped up on the previous episode. But again, I always want to be careful, well, yeah, maybe that's what they were called in the Middle Ages, but what were they called today?
So then I guess all this begs the next question of which of these jobs, for cathedrals in particular, is in the most demand, and which would be the most fun for someone like you? I imagine that's somewhat of an axis of demand to most fun. Designing a new cathedral, obviously most fun.
Right.
Definitely least in demand.
Right. Architect would probably be my first choice, but there's a real dearth of cathedral design going on around the world right now. I mean, there might be a few, but not many people are building Gothic cathedrals. I mean, arguably, the Washington National Cathedral is the one only full-sized, complete Gothic cathedral in the United States. You might remember we mentioned St. John the Divine in New York City,
which you trashed.
I mean, it's quote, complete, but it's not complete at all. They stopped construction well before the original intent of all the towers and one of the transepts. Whereas Washington National, it's kind of this special place where, this is the one place you can go in the United States to really see a full Gothic cathedral.
I got more questions, but we could probably go back and forth. Zach, you got any?
No, you usurped my question about what Tom would want to do if he had a chance to work at the cathedral.
You could ask it like that. At this specific cathedral, what would he want to do?
Are you going to be head change ringer? You come in for that position?
This is getting weirdly personal.
This entire podcast is personal.
This entire podcast is the most personal.
Yeah, but I mean, talking about love of cathedrals is one thing. Talking about what do I want to do for my job is a different thing.
At a cathedral.
Tom, isn't this whole thing just free therapy for you? Isn't that why we're doing this?
That is a very excellent point. Yes.
All right. Well, I guess you're unwilling to answer that question, which is fine. You don't have to answer every question.
Well, let me put it this way. I think I would really enjoy just about any of the jobs. I think I would love being a mason. I think I would love being an architect. I would love being an engineer. Actually, I think the structural engineer is a really interesting job that has to this day probably practical use, because the architect's job, I mean, again, maybe I don't have the full picture, but the architect's job does seem to be diminished, of course, once the project is over. A lot of these great buildings still have an architect that they go to, like the Capitol building has the architect, even Notre-Dame, Philippe, who Joe met in that one story he told, is currently the architect of Notre-Dame. But structural engineers do seem to be people that are actively always checking to make sure, like, oh, is this going to stay up or is something going to fall over? Can we do some experiments and some collection of data and figure out how the forces are interacting with the elements and the wind and changes in environment? So I think that would be, perhaps in present day, current form, that would be a job I would find very interesting. Also, you get to build cool models on 3D software and knock things over and watch it fall down virtually.
Well, you are probably our most dedicated listener, happens to be a newly licensed structural engineer. So, hey, sis-in-law, how was Tom's description there? I look forward to your recorded remarks that we will interject in the next podcast, correcting every mistake we've made.
Oh boy, that's going to be fun.
Calling you out.
Cathedral Talk reacts
by our listeners.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
One thing I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into, and again, these are questions that I had a lot of answers to, but again, good questions always lead to more questions. We were talking about the weathering of limestone, you remember, and how that the cathedral's weathering like 2 to 4 millimeters a century or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
I was wanting to go a step further, and I was almost thinking kind of like a Minecrafter, where I was like, so if you build this thing out of granite instead, right? Like if you build this thing out of something that isn't just limestone, will it stay up longer? Will it be, even more immortal than it would be in limestone? Maybe granite also weathers, or maybe it doesn't weather as much. But then, as Joe made the good point, limestone it's a perfect balance of strong, tough, durable, but also easier to carve, lightweight. And as they have learned at Notre-Dame, if your vaults are too heavy, they don't stay up. So I don't even entirely know if you can build the same kind of vault structure out of like a heavy stone like granite or not. And I would really like to know more, has that been done?
Limestone is lighter because it's more porous. Is that right?
Yeah, it's I think it's called a sedimentary rock, where it's built up of ancient fossils of this and that from some ancient era that have been compacted over time, like some kind of water basin thing or something. And it is porous. And there are different grades, as you heard, of limestone, some that are definitely more porous than others. And it sounds like the cathedral limestone here in DC is an especially high quality of limestone. And I was under the impression that probably makes it like more durable and less porous. But again, another good question.
Pop quiz. What are the other types of rock?
Igneous and Dwayne Johnson.
I was willing to accept punk. Pop.
I liked my answers.
Your answers were okay. Classic.
Dwayne Johnson, classic.
No. I was listing off other types of rock.
Yeah.
I wasn't. All right. Yeah. For those geology students in Tom's students, metamorphic is also an acceptable answer.
I forgot about that one.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot about that one too.
How could you forget about metamorphic?
Is it metamorphic, sedimentary, and igneous? Are those the three?
Sounds right.
I believe so.
That's truly, I think, 4th or 5th grade science class right there. I don't think I've studied that since I guess maybe briefly in 9th grade.
What limitations are there on volcanic rock that prevent them from being good cathedral stones?
Well, we talked about Cologne, and David knows well the effect of having that certain kind of rock to build that cathedral. It's dark.
Is that volcanic rock?
That's what he said. Yeah.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah. It was a different kind. Well, I mean, I think he did, but it was not your usual limestone. It was some kind of.
Yeah, he did say it was something different. Yeah.
And I said it was sandstone, but I was incorrect about that.
Oh.
Yeah. No, I was wrong.
The errata.
Yeah, where's the errata at the top of this episode? I want errata.
Sorry. This whole episode's been nothing but errata.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Mm-hmm.
And next episode will be errata for the errata.
When he mentioned too, like, you know how like people who have like brick houses who need to repoint their house every so often. And I was like, actually, I have a brick house and maybe I need to repoint it. I was like, is that something I need to add to my list of home ownership duties?
Well, that makes me go back to the jobs that you would enjoy doing. Would you enjoy doing any of the manual labor side of things? Like if it was part of a cathedral, or would it would have to be something in the more conceptual?
I think, if I had been there at the right time, if I had already had the training to be a mason when the earthquake had already happened, and then the real reconstruction was going on, I think that might have been an interesting time to be really a part of rebuilding the thing, or even better, when the thing was under initial construction in the first place. In terms of a lot of the upkeep and maintenance, I don't know. I mean, I've never done it, so I'm not going to try to judge, but I imagine just carving out old mortar and repointing new mortar, if that's all you're doing, like if everything else is fine, but it's just repointing over and over. I don't know, maybe that's monotonous, or maybe that's enjoyable. I imagine if you're on the south side of the cathedral and you get the great view in the sun, that's probably enjoyable, but it's cold, rainy day, maybe not so much.
Some of the work you do in Minecraft is more monotonous than that.
Well,
Tom hasn't been on Minecraft in a while.
Well, I was editing that last episode, Zack. It took a long time.
I have been on the server, and I occasionally fly back to the cathedral to see the progress.
Or lack thereof.
I will get some more done on that cathedral soon. We have more to do there. It is true. And I'll keep you appraised as I make some progress again.
So I think the most tantalizing part of the interview was, at one point, Mr. Alonso said, quote, "If the earthquake had lasted a few seconds more, ... and then just went off on a completely different tangent and didn't answer that. And as far as I remember, does not come back to that to explain what would have happened if it lasted a few seconds more. And I very much want to know.
More damage, presumably.
Yes, more damage.
Seemed like he was saying ... orders of magnitude.
Nothing would have happened. I think what would have happened was that instead of having a handful of pinnacles topple over, probably all the pinnacles would have toppled over. Probably a few of the east buttresses on the apse, some of those most damaged flying buttresses, may have given way. Who knows? Because they're really not that stable, as you remember, since they're not attached to the building. I don't think he was necessarily saying that the building would have structurally been threatened.
Sure.
But it would have been orders of magnitude more expensive and time consuming to repair.
Right.
The most tantalizing thing for me that was right at the end that we didn't really go into greater depth, but I wanted to probe Joe's soul just a little bit on Chart's restoration some more, because we talked about briefly how Chart had, the painting over the actual joints of the masonry with faux joints. And he definitely was like, oh, that's right, they did that. But I was like, yeah, so how do you feel about that? Like, is that like sacrilegious to you? Is that an affront to your job? And we didn't quite make it that far. So it's like, yeah, Like, how do you feel about that? Would you feel upset if somebody said your joints aren't good enough? We're going to paint some fake joints over that.
I did get the sense overall that you have stronger opinions than our friend Mr. Alonso, perhaps on certain things like this.
I mean, it's possible. We'll have to have a follow-up.
He seemed like a happy guy.
Oh, yeah. Joe's a great guy.
You seem like an eccentric.
That may be possible.
So, on him specifically, though, also, like, obviously, so much of your interview was on the earthquake for a good reason. I am curious to, I know you don't have an answer to this, but what would his career have been these past 10 years if the earthquake had not happened? I know he referenced a little bit, like, some of the projects that they were starting to work on then, and he also said how they were taking advantage of the scaffolding being up there to do some other repair work that was not related to the earthquake. But yeah, I just, it's a very different life trajectory or career trajectory if such a event hadn't occurred.
Well, we mentioned that the National Cathedral does have a lot of unused niches for statue and sculpture that can still be included. In fact, sometimes when you're walking around, you'll see these random like jets of blocks of stone just sort of like jetting out of a wall. And you'll be like, that's weird. Why is that block of stone just sort of jetting out of the wall over there? And they're like, oh, well, that's where they could carve some like head or face or gargoyle or something in the future. They just haven't done it yet. They're saving it for some future sculptor. Now, again, his job isn't a sculptor. But, I'm sure he would still be involved with assembling stones for more carvings and upkeep and stuff. And of course, then they talked about just all of the annoying maintenance, like the story of the funeral where all the flooding occurred with the pipes above the vaults. And so that's all the kind of stuff that's going to need to get fixed up by not only an engineer, but a mason too.
Right.
So you both have been to the cathedral before. What are your opinions on how the National Cathedral is versus some of the other cathedrals we've talked about so far? We've talked about the National Cathedral a few times, but largely I've tried to save the big discussion about the National Cathedral for another time. And well, here we are today. How do you say it compares to Notre-Dame or Chartres or Amiens or just other buildings in general? What do you think of it? Because you both have been there in person, right?
Yeah, but I haven't been to the other ones that you mentioned.
That's true. That's true.
I've only been to a couple of the others.
Well, I don't have any. Tom is looking for contrast and compare, and I don't have anything to compare it with.
So just talk about your own impressions without the comparison.
Yeah.
Without the comparison, I mean, I've been in, New England has a lot of stone churches, right? They're not cathedrals, but they're, I think if we go back to episode 1, where we talk about what is a cathedral, maybe some of them were technically cathedrals, but they're not giant stone structures like the Washington National Cathedral. They're just small stone structures. And I have a soft spot in my heart for stone churches because, as I said, New England is littered with them. And so there's some amount of familiarity that I experience when I enter those buildings. And having been in DC after having not been in New England for a very long time, brought back those feelings of, my high school had a big church. It didn't have the arcade is the thing that you walk around.
Yeah.
Didn't have that. And you were talking about how the Washington National Cathedral doesn't have that either.
The ambulatory in particular is the curved part at the end, but that's all part of the arcade. Yeah.
Yeah. And so those things were kind of reminiscent, or the lack of some structures, some spaces was familiar. I think if I went to a European Gothic cathedral, it wouldn't have the same sense of familiarity based off of the architectural conversations that we've been having.
Definitely.
Yeah, for me, the National Cathedral is an odd mix of modernity and the old world because it feels like an old, it obviously looks like an old world building, but when you get there, you can tell that it's more newly constructed, and it is, I don't mean this in a bad way, but jarring in that sense of that juxtaposition of two worlds. I think first off, to something you were saying at the very beginning, its location is perfect
Yeah.
for the city that it's in.
Yep.
It's just a little bit up a hill. It can look down at the rest of the city very well. It stands out. It's not subsumed by other things nearby, and it's got a little bit of breathing space in terms of the surrounding area too. It's not immediately abutted by other buildings.
Yeah.
Or at least big ones.
It's surrounded by a mixture of actual houses, homes, and
Right.
some apartment buildings that aren't too tall.
Right, exactly. I think it was the first time I had ever, I remember being struck by the three towers of it, and that being a very peculiar style that I wasn't used to, having primarily thought of Gothic cathedrals in the Notre-Dame style of just the two twin towers in the front.
Yeah.
Which the National Cathedral does have, but then it's got the one in the back. And it's funny, I had never really contemplated until you said in the interview either that those two towers in the front, they're just empty. They're just like, they're just
There's nothing in there. Yeah.
truly pure decoration.
Yeah.
Which is, I hadn't comprehended that before.
Yeah.
There's so much of that, my association with the cathedral is the center tower, because that's where the bell ringing is.
Yeah.
Which it's been even longer for me, but also a bell ringer there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think about it primarily from there. I think I've said previously that it's not as dark as Notre-Dame, but it's not a light cathedral on the inside.
Yeah.
It is still moody.
It's probably somewhere between Notre-Dame as we remember her before the fire.
Yeah.
And Amiens, which is largely all clear white glass.
I don't know, Amiens. How about, is Amiens brighter or darker than St. Paul's in England?
Amiens is a little bit darker than St. Paul's, but is definitely approaching.
Gotcha. Yeah, because St. Paul's is the epitome of
Yes.
as bright as you can make it.
St. Paul's is extremely bright. National Cathedral is somewhere in the middle because it's clean on the inside as opposed to most of these other buildings, which are filthy on the inside. And
Right.
as we have discussed episode after episode, this has been a profound discovery in the world of cathedrals that these things used to be a lot brighter if they had only just been cleaned more over the centuries on the inside. But on the other hand, the National Cathedral has a complete complement of stained glass. Like none of its windows are clear glass. All of its windows are beautiful, ornate, very rich colored blues and reds that does block light. So there's a lot of artificial lighting on the inside too to offset it. As is there a lot of artificial lighting in Notre-Dame and Reims and Chartres and Amiens as well. So yeah,
it shows that just being clean on the inside is not enough to make a cathedral feel particularly light. It really does come down to what type of glass the windows are.
One of my favorite little details that the National Cathedral has that isn't unique, but is definitely approaching unusual, is that in the clerestory, again, that giant array of windows at the top, right next to the vaults on the topmost level of the main nave. Unlike most clerestories at other cathedrals like Notre-Dame and Chartres and Amiens, the National Cathedral actually has a walkway right at the base of those windows. It's very narrow, it's very thin, and it's not for the faint of heart. But you can actually climb up there and be right up with those windows with an actual tiny little banister. Again, at most other Gothic cathedrals in France, there's no way to be up there. Like you'd have to actually get scaffolding to get up that high. But the National Cathedral actually has this walkway there. And it's actually kind of cool too, because since the windows are a little bit recessed in order to have the space for that walkway to go in front of them, you get more play with the stained glass shining through the window onto that sort of orthogonal surface of the walkway. And if you look at some of the shots of the nave in the slide deck that I included in the episode notes from the previous episode, it was actually a great day that I was just taking a bunch of photos of the inside because it was a very sunny day. And in the winter, since the sun's angle is a lot more pitched than it would be in the summer, you get these great projections of the stained glass onto the stone on the inside, and it's just breathtaking.
What's also breathtaking is this old postcard of a church that is apparently nostalgic for Zack that he just shared with us.
Oh, I want to see this.
This is the Sage Memorial Chapel that was on my high school grounds.
Oh, hey, that's cool. I like that.
Oh, that's much taller than the sense of scale at first I didn't see, but then you see those little people there. That's quite big.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty big. I mean, I think what throws it off is its tower is flat on the top, and it makes it look stunted. But even though it's stunted, it's actually quite tall.
You could fit 10 bells into that tower easily.
Yeah.
This is what I meant by like nostalgic.
Right.
Yeah. Well, also on a future time that hopefully I'll get to talk to Joe some more in the future. I mentioned earlier the Parthenon in the restoration that just keeps going and going and going on the Acropolis in Athens. And one of the things that's fascinating about the stonework or the marble work at the Parthenon is that there is no mortar in that ancient Greek structure. It's just block of marble on block of marble pinched together, squeezed together in like these incredibly precise joints. And I wanted to ask him, was like, does anybody build like that anymore where they just don't use mortar? I'm under the impression that no, it's the tried and true thing is to always use mortar. But again, the Parthenon is just block of stone on block of stone on block of stone. And how they got such impressive joints where they fit together that you can almost not even see the seams. I'm curious, like, to a mason, how impressive is that, and what would it take to get some kind of connection point like that?
Well, that leads to a question that I wasn't sure if we would naturally fit or not. But one of the questions that I had from your interview was, I don't understand what the difference between mortar versus pour concrete versus hard concrete.
Okay. Yeah. And that I don't know fully, but mortar, it's not straight up concrete. It sounds like from his description, you remember he even gave a formula for that.
Yeah.
Those bloody Victorians and their Portland cement.
I'm well aware of what Portland cement is for my climate change work.
Really? No.
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right.
Cement is one of the worst processes for carbon emissions that we have because of the.
Oh, I thought you were trying to push it over asphalt, but okay.
No. Well, yeah, I don't. Longevity matters a lot there, but purely because of the chemistry of the chemicals that are involved. So there's a lot of work right now trying to figure out how you can decarbonize concrete or inject carbon into concrete or such. So I have met with the Portland cement lobby before.
Okay, it's not just the cement lobby; it's the Portland cement lobby. I love it.
Not joking.
Yeah, mortar. It's not just straight up concrete that they're connecting the blocks to. It's some kind of intermediate. I think the best word is paste. It's like a paste. It's not like super glue that's holding these things together, like you're cementing them together. But it's filler. It hardens. It's supposed to be hard, but not too hard enough to seal it all together. But it'll give way so the stone is safe. But it sounds like there is a mixture of cement in the mixture as part of the formula too, which again, I don't begin to understand the chemistry.
I guess while we're doing questions, the last other question I had, this one I think you're probably more, sure, we'll go with more competent at answering.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Your discussion on freestanding buttresses, how are those different than like Notre-Dame buttresses?
Okay, so if you look at any of the flying buttresses at Notre-Dame, all of those flying buttresses eventually come down to the ground. But where they come down to the ground, they are connected to the outer wall of Notre-Dame. So, for example, the east end of Notre-Dame, the famous sort of semicircular end that you see from a lot of the great pictures on the Seine, all those flying buttresses, they come around to the outer circumference of that circle. And they are touched, and the whole building is, interlocked together with, a complex web of, stonework. But at the Washington National Cathedral, on the east end there, it has flying buttresses too that jet out from the top of the clerestory on the outside. They help hold up those, well, debated as we talked about in the episode, but theoretically are supposed to hold up those vaults on the east end of the apse. However, when they make contact with the standing buttresses, those standing buttresses do not touch the wall of the cathedral. It's just like these great pillars of stone that are just standing straight out of the ground. There are some pictures. Did you look at the pictures of the slide deck?
Wait, which slide deck?
Sorry, I didn't link it for this episode, but it was in the slide deck of the previous episode.
Oh.
If you might as well this might help you now. Go to the slide deck of the previous episode, whole bunch of pictures. I think it's maybe about a third of the way down all the slides I did. there's some pictures of I think it's like either 4 or 6 of these freestanding buttresses that they don't touch the wall. They're just these giant pillars of stone. It's almost like a connection point between 2 separate structures, this flyer. And since it's not connected to the outer wall, other than through the flyer itself, they sway a lot more in the event of an earthquake. As he also mentioned, it's unclear as to whether or not those particular flying buttresses are even really doing much to actually hold up that eastern end. And in fact, that's actually an interesting point. Do you remember when we were looking at Amiens Cathedral in 2 episodes ago? And how we talked about how it had some really terrible flying buttresses that were all lacy and didn't do their job, so somebody had to fix it and put in a new separate flying buttress underneath to try to make them effective again.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the east end of Amiens Cathedral on its semicircular apse or chevet or hemicycle, whatever the word is, you'll notice that they didn't include that secondary fix, that secondary prop that was included in some of the flyers just on the sides of the choir. And I've always wondered, it's like, well, was it unnecessary? Did they not need to fix those lacy flying buttresses on Amiens because they weren't buckling in the same way? And that makes me almost wonder if it's actually the exact same situation at Amiens. Maybe flying buttresses, just a pure guesswork, maybe flying buttresses are not as important on that little semicircular tip as they are on just those straight walls. You know, if you think about building something out of just blocks, a straight wall that isn't, got any curvature to it falls over way more easily than a curved thing does. If you build a curved wall out of blocks, it's got more rigidity to it. And I wonder if it's actually that a lot of these flying buttresses at these other French cathedrals on the east end, I'm just talking about the east end, that semicircle, I wonder if those are more decorative than we originally expected, much like was proposed at National Cathedral. We'll have to find out. Investigative research on Cathedral Talk podcast. That's what I'll do with my life, David. There's your answer to your question. I'm going to investigate flying buttresses.
I mean, isn't that what this podcast is?
More or less.
Podcast is accumulating reasons to be.
Finish that sentence?
No, that is. I don't know how to do the French. Raison d'etre.
Oh.
I have one little bit of news. Back to our favorite cathedral, Notre-Dame in Paris. I have seen recent video evidence that they now have the wooden framework or the wooden centering all in place for rebuilding the central vault now. If you actually go online, you can see some videos. Maybe I'll link them in the show notes to this episode of, that the main vault that had collapsed. There's now actually woodwork where they're going to be placing the stones to rebuild those ribs and eventually that webbing or that infill, as Joe called it. That's faster than I expected. I wasn't expecting them to be ready to already have that in place. So I'm really curious to see how fast this job is going to go, because I keep waiting for somebody in the news to say, actually, guys, it's just not happening. It's not going to be built in time for the Olympics. But they keep saying, it's going to be ready. And now I'm getting real nervous if I have to buy Olympics tickets or not.
We're not close enough to the Olympics for them to make a call like that.
I mean, how close do we have to be for them to make that kind of call?
The soonest would be a year out, right?
I guess. But
and possibly
I need to know if I'm buying tickets to go to the Olympics or not. This is a hard call.
Just get refundable.
Refundable tickets to the Olympics. Is that a thing?
Refundable tickets.
I mean, you can still go and you can still visit the island even if you can't enter the building, right?
Yeah. But I think I want to time up my trip with a significant moment for the reconstruction at Notre-Dame. So I don't know.
Would you rather be there for the significant moment of reconstruction, or would you rather be there for the Olympics?
I think you could answer that question, Zach.
Yeah, that's not a tough question.
Well, I'm just thinking about Tom visiting the Olympic athlete city and partying with all the athletes. It sounds like Tom.
Yep, that's totally me. That's it for now. Check out our podcast website at cathedraltalk.fm. There you will find many architectural visuals and Minecraft goodies. If you would like to support our efforts here at Cathedral Talk to aid in the restoration of Notre-Dame, please use the direct link on our website to donate to Friends of Notre-Dame de Paris.org. Friends of Notre-Dame is a non-profit organization that is leading the international fundraising efforts to rebuild and restore Notre-Dame Cathedral. By donating to them through the link at cathedraltalk.fm, we'll know that our podcast is reaching new patrons. As our own Minecraft project progresses, we'll be sure to share plans, screenshots, and videos for your own visual palette. Good day and happy building.